Good evening, everyone. We begin by acknowledging that the Weisman Art Museum is located on the traditional and contemporary land of the Dakota people. We aspire to honor and respect the Indigenous peoples, past, present, and future, by incorporating Indigenous knowledge in our work and establishing meaningful, reciprocal relationships with carriers of Indigenous knowledge and with communities. I'm Katie Covey-Spanier, Director of Programming and Student Engagement at the Weisman Art Museum. Tonight's program, The Legacy of Bearing Witness While Black in Minnesota, was to be held in conversation with the Weisman Spring Exhibition, Pressing Issues, Printmaking as Social Justice in 1930s United States. That conversation was postponed when on Sunday, April 11th, police in Brooklyn Center fatally shot 20-year-old Dante Wright during a traffic stop. This tragedy occurred less than a year after the killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis and during the murder trial of his killer, former officer Derek Chauvin. The violent deaths of these two men are not isolated events. Due to systemic racism, law enforcement uses disproportionate brutality against Black people in Minnesota and across the United States, and is highlighted by artists whose work was created nearly a century ago and featured in the Weisman Spring Exhibition, Pressing Issues. These acts of racial terror are not new. While this last year is marked by profound loss, it has also been a time of great reimagining. And as a teaching museum for the University of Minnesota, the Weisman has a role to play in confronting and taking action against racism and injustice. We hope you will join us in this act of reimagining by contributing your feedback, critique, and hopes for the future of the Weisman by visiting our website or by clicking through the link, which will be in the chat box below. As an organization whose mission is to create art experiences that spark discovery, critical thinking, and transformation, we are thrilled to be featuring changemaker Dr. Allissa V. Richardson for tonight's discussion. Dr. Richardson is an assistant professor of journalism at USC Annenberg, where she researches how African Americans use mobile and social media to produce innovative forms of journalism, especially in times of crisis. She will discuss how smartphone testimony from two brave Minnesotans, Diamond Reynolds and Darnella Frazier, galvanized the Black Lives Matter movement in 2016 and 2020, when they filmed the police killings of Philando, Castile, and George Floyd, respectfully. After the talk, we'll have a moderated discussion led by Dr. Danielle Kilgo. Dr. Kilgo is the John and Elizabeth Bates Cowles Professor of Journalism, Diversity, and Equity in the Hubbard School of Journalism and Mass Communication at the University of Minnesota Twin Cities. Her research interests look primarily at the interaction among social movements, social media, and journalism. Everyone has the ability to confront racism. And throughout tonight's talk, we'll be sharing resources on how you can take action in the chat box below. As we begin the program, I would like to thank the voters of Minnesota for supporting the operational budget of our museum through funds from the Minnesota State Arts Board. Thank you to the Wells Fargo Foundation Minnesota also for supporting our operational budget. The University of Minnesota's Office of Equity and Diversity and the Student Service Fees Committee for their financial support of this program. And I'm grateful to my colleagues at the Weisman Art Museum for helping to make this event happen this evening. Throughout our conversation, we invite you to submit your questions and thoughts through the Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We will respond to your question in the Q&A period after the presentation. You may upvote the questions you're interested in by clicking the like button, and the questions with more votes will rise to the top of the queue. We will be recording tonight's event, and it will be posted in the Weisman's YouTube channel. To ensure the event remains accessible to all, we're incorporating live captioning and ASL video interpreters so all may participate. During a screen share, if the ASL video is too large or too small, attendees may drag the vertical divider left or right to increase or decrease the size of both the shared content and the video feeds. Live captioning is also an option that you can select to have visible. To turn on live captioning, select Show Subtitles in the drop-down menu under the Live Transcription tab at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And now, I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Allissa V. Richardson. Dr. Richardson is the author of Bearing Witness While Black, African Americans, Smartphones, and the New Protest Journalism. The book explores the lives of 15 mobile journalist activists who have documented the Black Lives Matter movement using only their smartphones and Twitter. Richardson's research is informed by her award-winning journalism innovator. She is considered a pioneer in mobile journalism, having launched the world's first smartphone-only college newsroom in 2010 in the US, Morocco, and South Africa. Richardson won the National Association of Black Journalists' prestigious Journalism Educator of the Year award for her international work. She is an inductee into Apple's Elite Distinguished Educator Program and the recipient of 2 esteemed Harvard University posts, the Nieman Foundation Visiting Journalism Fellowship and the Berkham Klein Center for Internet and Society Fellowship. Lastly, she's a fellow in Columbia University's Tow Center for Digital Journalism. Richardson's research has been published in Convergence, Journal of Communication, Digital Journalism, Journalism Studies, and the Black Scholar. She serves on the editorial boards of Digital Journalism, Journalism Practice, and the International Journal of Communication. And she's affiliated researcher with New York University's Center for Critical Race and Digital Studies. She holds a PhD in journalism studies from the University of Maryland Park, a master's in magazine publishing from Northwestern University's Medill School, and a Bachelor of Science in biology from Xavier University, Louisiana, where she was named a top 40 under 40 alumna. And now I would like to welcome Dr. Richardson to the screen.
Thank you so much, Weisman Art Museum and the Twin Cities in general at large for having me. And thank you, Katie, for the wonderful introduction. I'm really excited to be with you all this evening after a long wait, after a month of making sure that we were whole and in safe places to have this conversation. And tonight, I really want to talk to you about something that's very dear to me in terms of African Americans bearing witness to their own news and using the devices that they have in their pockets to do so. This is something that I fell in love with about 10 years ago, and I've watched it grow over the last decade from kind of accidental footage to very meaningful long form storytelling that has galvanized some of the largest social justice movements that we've seen in America's history. So I really want to begin by anchoring us with some people who inspire me most and who inspired this book project. And so, as I said, Bearing Witness While Black is not just the name of a book, it's really a philosophy. And it's one that I saw missing from our landscape of media research. As a PhD student, the first week that I was in school, Mike Brown was killed. And I didn't see any literature that spoke to the fact that I was looking out at a sea of Black folks with their cell phones doing what in many cases legacy media were having a very, very hard time doing. And that's telling the story of a city, a people, and lastly, a person. And this got a little bit closer to home that very following year in 2015. This man, Devin Allen, that you see here, went outside with a DSLR and his cell phone camera and decided to record and take pictures of the Freddie Gray uprisings in Baltimore. And so here we are 30 minutes from these uprisings. I'm also, as I should mention, teaching at Bowie State University, which is an HBCU, and in the second year of a PhD program, where I'm still not seeing enough papers, enough research about this genius, this Black genius in the form of journalistic storytelling. And this is when I really decide to make a shift to study people like Devin and really understand why they are doing this hard work of bearing witness while Black. So in the next couple of minutes, I want to talk to you about what that concept means, why Minneapolis is the epicenter of that, and in many ways, why it is the kind of eventual and anticipated origin of all of this, considering who comes from this city. And so I've really been drawn to your city because it, for me, is a hub of Black journalism. And I have to start with a quote that I stumbled upon as a journalism PhD student. And I began to look at some of the icons a bit differently, poring over every single interview that they've done. And I found this one from James Baldwin. And although I'd read his books, I'd never really listened to at this point in my life how just eloquent he was and impassioned during TV and radio interviews. And this particular one struck me. He was doing an interview in London on TV, and he said, Black people need witnesses in this hostile world. And it really, I just paused. I remember pausing that video thinking, why witnesses? Witness is a loaded word. It has moral weight to it. It has legal weight to it, as in you're testifying, you promise to tell the truth and nothing but the whole truth. It has religious weight to it. Can I get a witness? We hear that in church. And so I think about that word witness, and I started to play with this and say, what are Black people bearing witness to? Why do they need someone to testify on their behalf, to say, yes, I indeed did see that. He or she or they is telling the truth. And that just wouldn't leave me alone the whole program, thinking of witnessing through this new lens. I'd done a ton of research that said media witnessing, in fact, when you watch something secondhand, removes you emotionally from the event. And all the scholarship was saying it's a secondhand way of understanding something. But that didn't explain to me why Black people were seeing these videos of people who look like their parents, relatives, loved ones, and they were not unemotional in doing that secondhand viewing. No, in fact, they were looking at those videos and becoming quite impassioned. They were taking to the streets. They were organizing. They were creating some of the largest movements that we'd seen since the Civil Rights Movement. And as they grew and grew, I kept thinking this concept of witnessing must be played with, and we must build upon it so that we give it an ethnocentric lens. The way that Black people look and bear witness is totally different from anything I've ever seen before. And hopefully I can convince you that that's the case. And so when I think about this oppositional gaze, as Bell Hooks calls it, Devin Allen really gave me the impetus to go forth with this as a PhD dissertation project. As I mentioned, I was in school during this first wave, as we call it, of the Black Lives Matter movement in 2014 and 2015. And my students and I tracked him down after he ended up on the cover of Time magazine, making him one of only 3 amateurs to ever have done so. And we asked him if we could meet with him. He said yes. He was very gracious about his time. And we met with him in a store called City of Gods. And it was right next to a barbershop. And one of my favorite pieces of our interview is why Devin believed he was called to do this work. And this is what he told me.
So I just felt I could tell the story and of the uprising better than any media outlet. And I feel like I did, and I wanted to show, I know that media's only going to show one side of everything, and I knew I can tell both sides of the fence, show you the negative, but also show you the positive things that came from, due to the death of Freddie Gray.
So my students heard that and they were quite worried. They were like, oh, he can do a better job. Then what am I doing in journalism school? I've got my cell phone. I can just go out here and be Devin. And so one of the things that they were very excited about after that interview is to see him get his shine, so to speak, and to be on the cover of Time magazine as an amateur, so to speak, only doing, wedding photographs and pictures of beautiful people in Baltimore prior to this. It inspired them so much. They were thinking, here I am, thinking I have to have years and years and years of work, but I really just have to tell the truth that people haven't really seen a lot of before. That again stuck with me because I'm still playing with this idea of Baldwin saying that we have to bear witness and that we need witnesses. And so I'm thinking of my students and hearing them say, just us shining a light on these things is going to be seen as so innovative because no one's ever dared to look at it before. Now, Devin Allen made history again last year on Time magazine again, this time photographing a peaceful die-in in Baltimore. And so he became someone that allowed me to follow him for the next couple of years to see what does this concept of bearing witness consist of for Black people? And why is it that you're doing it? Another great thing that he told me is that he was inspired by Gordon Parks, which brought me to you. Gordon Parks was someone that he did not know about as he became a photographer. He said he was really just playing with light, playing with emotion, playing with feelings, and really just having a love of not only his city, but his people, and really trying to capture them in the most loving way. And when he ended up on the cover of Time, people began to approach him. And one group that did so asked him to be the inaugural Gordon Parks Fellow. And I remember asking him, do you know what this means? Do you know the footsteps that you're following in? And he said, I know now. Initially I did not know who Gordon Parks was. And I really had to be brought up to speed about just a Renaissance man that he was. And when I think about Gordon Parks as an iconic photographer, I think about this image. I think about American Gothic and how he turned it on its head, and how he did this as a worker for the Farm Security Administration during the New Deal, when the President Roosevelt was trying to figure out how to get Black folks, everybody generally, back to work after the Great Depression. And I think about Gordon Parks because he began in the Twin Cities. Although he wasn't born there, he moved there at a very young age and bought his first camera in your hometown. And one of the things that he loved to do was make sure that he was taking pictures of things that irked him, but he referred to his camera in a special way. He said, I picked up my camera because it was a choice of weapons against what I hated most in the world, including racism, intolerance, and poverty. And I thought about this, juxtaposing this idea of a camera as a weapon, and then this need to bear witness. And then I keep thinking weapon, witness, weapon, witness. And I kept thinking of the power that Black people have been harnessing for a very long time just by looking. And I thought about, as I started to study more of Gordon Parks and draw parallels between his work and Devin Allen's work, that he was working along the railroad as a Pullman porter, which is the original Black Twitter, if you will. As a Pullman porter, Gordon Parks would have been privy to all kind of conversations amongst dignitaries. He would have known all the juice before everybody else knew it. And he had this weapon, right? He had this camera to take pictures if he wanted to, as he saw the world go by. And I think about the Pullman porter profession as one that led to so many journalists getting their feet wet, and for being people who were sharing news across various Black publications. And I kept coming back to Gordon Parks and saying there's a very clean line between what Devin Allen is doing to Gordon Parks. We can draw it back historically. And I realized that I'd been playing with these ideas for a long time, but I hadn't been couching them that way, haven't been framing them that way. When I thought about mobile journalism, this is how it all began back in 2010.
Mojo is a mobile journalist. It's a student who reports using only mobile devices. The equipment has gotten a lot smaller for reporting. You see how our head is like still at the top and sometimes out of the frame? Very nice. You can report from a cell phone these days and then send it right back to the newsroom using a Wi-Fi connection or any local type of internet connection. And that's really what we want to instill in our students, is that when you see news right on the spot, you do have the ability to capture it and send it back someplace and get paid for it. A lot of them are kind of getting out of the mindset of, I have to work for the next big media outlet. And a lot of them are getting more comfortable with the introduction of this Mojo project with working for themselves. Journalism is serious. It's hard. It's not something that you're just going to succeed at very quickly. Good, it was steady. She's right in the middle. The way that you sound has to kind of translate to different places. Let's do that again. Don't try to hide it. That's really what the Mojo project is giving them these new mobile skills and also teaching them how to be entrepreneurial in the process of gathering or reporting news.
So it seems quaint now, but my kids and I had to make a commercial 10 years ago to explain to people, what is Mojo? What is mobile journalism? Why should we take this seriously? And we took this commercial on the road with us, basically. We started telling everybody who would listen that this is the future, that mobile journalism is a way to lower the barrier of entry so that people can participate in journalism in ways that they haven't been able to before. And so Global Girl Media invited us to come and replicate our prize-winning curriculum by this point in South Africa. And in doing that, I really realized the power of mobile journalism, quite frankly, because we were doing a program with girls who openly identified as HIV positive. And they wanted to tell their stories because they felt like time was running out. Many of them would go on to live really long, full lives. But some of them, like Lorato, who's featured here at the mic, passed away at age 18. And I just kept thinking about, shortly after leaving the continent, if we hadn't had this technology, maybe we never would have heard from her. Maybe we never would have had a chance to see her video in Times Square on World AIDS Day as she's giving a stand-up talking about living with the disease. Maybe we never would have even known her name. That kept toying with me. Also, what kept toying with me is when we got invited back to the continent, this time in the wake of the Arab Spring. And the King of Morocco spoke to the US State Department and asked, can you create a program that empowers people, that makes them feel like they're telling their story so that we don't have the unrest that we have in Egypt and in Libya? And so we did our best to create a program where we crisscrossed the country with, this time, 40 girls. And it was 40 girls in nearly every city that we went to. And we're just traveling through, making sure that people understand what it is that we're working on. And I should mention that in Morocco, women are not allowed to be out with male accompaniment. And so to have these young women out by themselves with these tiny devices caused quite an uproar. We were trending for an entire week, girls on the street. And this dad actually comes downstairs, one of my favorite parents of the program. And he flings open the door and says, hey, are you the girls on the street? And we were like, what is girls on the street? And I'm like kind of protective of them because I know that some people aren't happy that we're going to have all these girls out doing things. And he says, no, I love what you're doing. Let me go get my daughters. And he brings 6 beautiful little girls down, ranging in age from like 2 to 20. And he was like, can they all participate? And at that point, our youngest Mojo was like 7 years old. And we said, sure. And so the 2-year-old stayed home with dad. The rest of them came and joined the program. And he didn't allow them to be photographed. He's like, but you can take a picture of me, which is why we have this picture here. But he was taken with this technology, as were most of the people that we encountered. They say, you can make a whole news broadcast on that. And I told them, yes. And we just anticipated all kind of things. We started getting free offers to try out accessories, microphones, all kind of cool stuff. And then I had this fellowship. I had a chance to really spend a year off thinking about all that I'd done on the continent to see how can we operationalize this? How can we make it so more little girls can participate in mobile journalism? Because that was my focus at the time, girlhood and getting girls to tell their stories. And so I decided after that fellowship, I was going to need even more time. And as a lecturer, you can't do that. There's a definite pecking order in colleges where I was teaching 4 to 5 to 6 classes per semester. But going back to school, I knew would allow me to drop down to teaching 2 classes a semester, but also be in the field and research and write. And so that's what I did. I earned my PhD at Maryland. And these are my kids just glad that I can come outside again and get from in front of the computer. But when I did come back outside, these are some of the things that, again, I'm looking at my footage from home, from my voyages. I'm looking at footages from The Square, which is featured here, an Academy Award-winning film that featured cell phone footage and DSLR footage of Tahrir Square in Egypt. And I'm also thinking a lot about Occupy Wall Street and how the cell phone again took center stage, where an activist named Tim Pool, who's featured here, used his cell phone to attach it to a drone, the very first person to do that, and get aerial footage that legacy media couldn't even get. And I kept thinking, where though is any reference in this literature, again, to what my people have done with cameras? And I kept thinking a lot about people of color in general and how they knew to press record at this really imperiled time. And I think about this video, this Rodney King video turned 30 years old this year. And I was watching it as a kid with my dad. And I remember my dad saying to me, back home, they don't do this to people. He's the son of the Caribbean. And I was thinking, well, home is here for me. Like, what are you talking about? Is this going to happen to you? Is this going to happen to my brother? I remember being horrified by this. And I also remember being very intrigued at a young age. Why haven't we seen anything like this before? And as I got into grad school and really recognized this is a watershed moment of people, ordinary people bearing witness, I then began to study it even more. I followed everybody who had a cell phone who was putting things out during Ferguson, really gathering thousands and thousands of clips, and then contacting each person, asking them to do interviews with me, to really sit with me and tell me why they were doing this kind of work. It had gone from us creating this Mojo lab where we were just having fun and tinkering and getting free stuff in the mail, to then voyaging across the pond, as they call it, to Africa to do all kinds of teaching in the northern and the southern tips, to then coming right back home to realizing everything that I needed to know about Black people and mobile journalism was right there in the Midwest. And the way that I learned about Ferguson was not through a regular, ordinary broadcast on cable television. It was through a man named Emmanuel Freeman, who decided to live tweet from the moment that he heard the gunshots to the moment the peaceful protests began. And I thought, this is the first time I'm getting news from people who look like me, and I'm not flicking back and forth between all three major cable stations because they don't have it yet. What is going on? How come they haven't caught up yet? And as I began to really study and have this luxury, this newfound time of being a scholar, I started to realize that there is a thread that I can draw and connect between these three overlapping eras of domestic terror against Black people. And through each of these eras, we have been bearing witness. We've always been here. And when I realized that, I got chills because I started to think there's a connection between not only Gordon Parks and Devin Allen, Minneapolis and Baltimore, but there's a connection between throughout time, throughout continents. And I realized this is why I've been crisscrossing, going back and forth between the United States, between Africa, looking for something, trying to figure out how do I tie all this looking together. And I realized that when I thought about slavery and I thought about who documented that, who told me about it, I thought about the format first, the technology of the day, and it was a slave pamphlet, which then gave way to a newspaper. And I found out about it from icons like Frederick Douglass that we'll talk about. And that gave way, though. Slavery was abolished, but then morphed to lynching as a form of control of Black prosperity and movement. And again, Black folks were right there with the latest technology, bearing witness while Black, making sure someone took tally, took notes. And then as we travel throughout time, and as lynching never becomes outlaw, there's never a law that was passed that says you should not do this, but as it falls by the wayside and wanes in ways that we recognize, it then takes up the mantle of police brutality. Police then become the first gateway entry point into mass incarceration, which we know decimated communities from the war on drugs in the 70s to now. I think about how at each moment of hope for Black people, with Reconstruction, then comes a backlash, lynching. With hope, passage of the Civil Rights Act in 64, 70, here we go with this war on drugs. Every single time there's an ebb and a flow and an ebb and a flow of all of these things that we're experiencing and witnessing. And I think about during these times though, what's special about now is that during slavery, we could not look. We were not allowed to look unless someone was making an example of us. If you think about films like 12 Years a Slave, like Chiwetel Ejiofor's character is hanging and the slaves are sweeping up behind him in the background. They're not looking because they don't want to incur the wrath of their master. If we think about lynching photographs, there's no Black people huddled in the corners of those pictures. They're likely fleeing town. I've read the accounts of whole towns picking up and leaving when a massacre began. But this era is the first time that we can see Minnesotans like Diamond Reynolds direct her camera and use for the first time an app that is brand new to the world, Facebook Live, to share what is happening to her beloved Philando. This is the first time in real time we have a 17-year-old girl use her cell phone to say with it, I'm not going to leave you. I'm going to stay here. I'm going to make sure people know your name. And I'm going to make sure to try to get justice for you as best as I can. We could never do that before. It had to be after the fact writing. It had to be later. It had to be clandestine. It was secret. We had to write and learn how to read and write in secret. It was illegal for Black folks to even write down or say the things that they'd seen. But now, this whole era is completely wide open, brand new, and that's what I decided to write about. So my dissertation became a personal exploration of all the mojo tinkering from 10 years prior to what it has brought us to now, a real vehicle and a tool in the toolbox of modern activists. And so Bearing Witness While Black makes sure that it documents that journey. It makes sure that I don't say the cell phone is like the answer to everything. The cell phone is some brand new thing. It brought us all this justice. No, we've been here. Black people have been doing activist style journalism and bearing witness looking while Black for a long time. I looked at the slave narratives. I looked at Frederick Douglass's not one, not two, but three, to see how he transitioned from that into newspapering. I also followed very closely how he passed the baton to his mentee, Ida B. Wells, and how she kept her red record of lynching, and how making sure every single human being, every soul was accounted for, won her the Pulitzer Prize posthumously last year. And when I think about the work, the fear that must have been involved when you're sneaking from points north down south to make sure that you have the story right, it just, again, brought me chills to know that somebody cared enough about our people to make sure that that was documented. Because we have to remember, legacy media at the time was not doing that. They were saying that this person who is unknown died at the hands of persons unknown. At the hands of persons unknown was the party line for Klan, for sheriffs, for judges, esteemed people who were part of the community who allowed the lynching or participated in it. Sometimes Black folks would be named, sometimes not. And thanks to Ida, we know who a lot of those people are. And I also think about John Lewis, again, connecting dots. We lost him last year. We lost C.T. Vivian on the same day, who was the field lieutenant for Dr. King. And when I think about their departure, I also think about how they manipulated the media of their day. They only had 15 minutes. They didn't have 24-hour news cycles. They had 15 minutes to get in and get out and make an appeal. That 15 minutes of fame is where that comes from. And so they chose to stage their sit-ins, demonstrations, marches around the time of that evening broadcast to make sure you got that snarling German Shepherd shot. There's a new vanguard though, and this new vanguard includes the foundress of Black Lives Matter. She's in the book. Brittany Farrell, who created Millennial Activists United, is in the book. Brittany Packnett, who created Campaign Zero, is in there. The family attorney for Walter Scott, Alton Sterling, and now George Floyd is in the book. And so many others lent their time and their energy to me to allow me to call them over and over again as new cases would break, as new family members would pass away, to ask not only how are you doing, but why are you still in this? Why are you still doing this work? It has to be so painful. And these are some of the things that they told me. Brittany Packnett, you may remember here, was appointed to President Obama's 21st Century Commission for Policing. And in this picture, it's one of my favorite pictures of her because she's still very, very skeptical. She's not, smitten immediately by being on this thing. And she is holding not only the president, but the entire administration's feet to the fire about this. And she said, this is why she decided to get out on Twitter with her cell phone every single day of Ferguson.
On the ground, people would go up to cameras and say, until people are tweeting me right now, calling me right now, saying that you're reporting this incorrectly, so we're going to stand here in front of your camera until you decide to tell the truth. So there was not only a decision to give the truth ourselves, there was also a clear decision to challenge mainstream media and hold them accountable to speaking the truth as well. And social media gave us the access to do that.
So revising or creating counter narratives was incredibly important. I also heard from Clint Smith. Clint Smith is now a writer, a staff writer for The Atlantic, but at the time was a PhD student at Harvard studying education. And he said he felt like he just had to do this. Something was calling him. He gave a TED Talk about this in a poem, which has been viewed more than 6 million times, and made time to talk to me about why he decided to stay on Twitter and just tweet incessantly, blog incessantly, write articles, even though he's not a trained journalist, doing the work of journalists voluntarily in many cases before he broke through to the mainstream. And I said, why? Why did you do this kind of work? It had to be hard. You had to be doxxed and threatened. What was in it for you, so to speak? And this is what he said.
I started graduate school the same week Mike Brown was killed, and so it was impossible for me to disentangle what I saw happening in the world and what I was reading about in my book. So I started to use Twitter as a way to share sort of snippets of what I was learning.
And hundreds of thousands of followers later, he became a best-selling author and is now no longer someone we would consider an amateur, but now the staff writer on the same magazine that W.E.B. Du Bois wrote for, that Frederick Douglass wrote for. And again, seeing all these concentric circles, all these Venn diagrams, these historic connections between Black people still trying to tell the same story through different media just really touched me. I also thought about people like Aisha Evans, who become these unapologetic, but kind of accidental media icons. I was in the airport in Milan, Italy, when I saw this photograph on the cover of a magazine. And my saddest thought, I remember thinking, this looks like home. What happened? What happened at home? And for that to be my first thought, that this would only happen in America, but then to be confirmed when I asked the guy at the sales booth if he could translate it for me, he said, oh, they shot some people. And I said, well, who? What happened? He said, there's a man, his name is Alton Sterling, but then another man died the next day. And as I'm starting to disembark and grabbing my cell phone to see what's going on, I see Diamond Reynolds' video of Philando, Castile. And I remember just crying in the airport thinking, what is going on? And why are they arresting this woman in a sundress? And so immediately as I got home, I said, I have to find her. I have to figure out what happened. Why was she arrested? And as she kept tweeting, created her own Twitter account to counter some of the fake accounts that were popping up. She said, I felt like I had to do this work to let people know how I was treated as a peaceful protester. And so I wanted to redress some of my grievances through the media, since protest obviously wasn't going to be available to me. And this is what she said.
I didn't even know what I was being charged with until my bond was posted, until I had an amount for me to bail out of jail with. Until then, I didn't know what I was being, detained for. In prison, not jail, not no central bookings, like prison. It's real in Louisiana.
And Aisha came and spoke to my class. So you hear my class in the background saying, right, amen choir, because they were just like, what is going on? And the fact that she spoke to them on a couple occasions to really share with them what their rights were when they were arrested and whether or not they would be safe and how to stay safe when you don't even know what the charges are against you, again, is a moment I thought, this is all part of the Bearing Witness While Black experience. And if you are arrested while you are protesting, someone still has to bear witness to what happened. Going back to what James Baldwin said, we still need witnesses when we're unable to speak for ourselves, as well-meaning as we may be and as capable as we may be. And so this summer, someone did in one painting what I attempted to do in 10 years of work and more than almost 300 pages of book. The great Khadir Nelson painted this portrait for the New Yorker. And in it, he is stitching together these three overlapping eras of domestic terror that I've been talking to you about for the last few minutes. At the very bottom, he has a diagram of the Middle Passage. That's how we would have been lined up in the ships coming from Africa to points west. He also has a picture of Whipped Pete in the left-hand bottom corner, or the right-hand bottom corner. And Whipped Pete is the first slave who sat for a journalist's pictures. He wanted to be photographed so people could see the horrors of slavery for themselves. And then we see Rodney King's video right in the middle. And again, tears. I'm weeping at this point because I'm realizing this is exactly what I've been trying to convey in all of these lectures and all of this work, that we are all connected. All of this work is connected. You see Emmett Till to the right of this, and then Breonna Taylor, and I Am a Man placard is here for Dr. King's last stand before he was assassinated in Memphis. You see Dr. King and Medgar Evers and Malcolm X on that same side, and Tamir's just above that. A Minnesotan, your dear Philando, is just above Tamir. And as you move to the other side of George's chest, you see Sandy Bland and Alton Sterling, Mike Brown. And as you continue to move upward, which I thought was most poignant, some of the youngest people, youngest victims, Trayvon is here, Eric Garner's here, Ahmaud Arbery is here. And I just keep thinking about this, a man was lynched yesterday poster, because that flag actually flew outside of NAACP's headquarters for years as they tried to lobby unsuccessfully to get lynching outlawed. And you know what they did to raise the money for that flag? They bought up all of the lynching postcards down south and published them in the Crisis magazine. Membership skyrocketed. People were like, what is going on? They were horrified by what they saw. But the ancestors did something else, which really, really bothered me when I thought about our current iteration of things. The ancestors made sure they retired those photographs after a while to remove the shock factor, to remove the extractive kind of format of that storytelling, and retired them to what we call a shadow archive. And there's not enough space even inside Mr. Floyd's huge frame to include all of the people who belong here, who are part of this really macabre group who've lost their lives to vigilantes, systemic racists, and police. And as I began to think about how we remember them, I thought there's an important distinction here. Emmett Till's mom, Mamie Till Mobley, had a choice. She asked Mr. Johnson, the publisher of Jet magazine, please open the casket. I want the world to see what they did to my baby. And he obliged her. And in 1955, that reinvigorated the civil rights movement, which was getting ready to go dormant just after World War II's Double V campaign was subsiding. It reinvigorated it, just like Mr. Floyd's video reinvigorated the Black Lives Matter movement. But when I think about Mamie having a choice, Mamie Till Mobley said, I am allowing you to do this, and I understand full well what its consequences will be, but I believe that it outweighs any pain I may feel from being re-traumatized by this image. Mr. Floyd's family didn't get that choice. And that began to bother me so much last year, you all. I began to think that seeing him die over and over and over again on television, sometimes not even without a trigger warning, on social media, definitely not without that little privacy screen. And I began thinking, who is this for? Because this lynching photography feel almost has a gloating air to it. I don't see anybody else dying on primetime television but Black folks. And I said, this is a real problem because I understand on one arm, people needed to know that this happens. People needed to be aware of this. But then I'm seeing memes pop up of people saying that they're Floyding, where you had one white man on the ground with another white man on top of him with his knee on his neck, and they're smiling gleefully, reenacting a gruesome scene. It made me think of the Trayvoning meme, where these white teenagers were laying down on the ground wearing a hoodie with Skittles and Arizona iced tea carefully placed by their side, mocking his look of surprise at the moment of his death. And I began to think, we are not looking at these in the same way. When Baldwin is asking for witnesses, he's asking for allies, he's asking, now that you have seen this thing, please help. But I realize there's a certain portion of the population is, now that I've seen these things, it's an attaboy. It's justification, the system is working the way that it should. And it makes me feel comfortable to know that even though we have a Black man as president, that even though Black folks are making all these advances, the police are still on top of it in my community. And I started to see that second kind of strain of conversation going outside of Black Twitter, and I was horrified by it. I thought again of the man was lynched yesterday, couldn't leave that flag alone. And then the man who recreated this man was lynched by police yesterday flag, who appears in the book, Dred Scott, is an artist. And he said, it was important to me to reimagine that flag after the death of Philando Castile, so that people would know that the lynching now does not necessarily happen by townspeople who are gathered for a picnic wearing white sheets. Sometimes it happens now by police. And so I decided to draw upon that idea and say, let's equate these cell phone videos with the same gravity and sincerity as we would with lynching photographs. Just as I would be very, very thoughtful about reposting something like that. And as many people probably would never do it. We thought nothing about posting these kind of videos over and over again and what it would do to the families. That essay really went viral. And last summer, lots of journalists called and said, I'm hurt. My feelings are hurt. You're one of us. What are you saying? We have to tell a story and we're in a visual medium. What am I supposed to show? And I said, don't show me in a 2-shot with you beating up a random Black person that doesn't even have a name next to it. I had to scold a journalist on air about it because they put what they considered B-roll of a Black person being beaten by an LAPD cop and me talking. I said, this right here, this paradigm here has to shift. We have to stop doing this. And I can hear them in my earphones saying, oh, camera, switch it, change it, put anything else on. By the time I get to MSNBC, I guess the word had gotten out. They didn't make that mistake. They were like, we're just going to show whatever is happening. We're going to show the street. If it's boring behind, fine. They didn't feel the need to keep looping Mr. Floyd's death. They didn't feel the need to keep showing fire and brimstone if there was none, because most of the time there isn't. A lot of protests are really boring. There are people doing the cha-cha slide, people cooking out, people trying to sing, get themselves together, organize, and mourn, grieve. the flash in the pan moments that we have of violence are so few and far between, but if you look at news, you would not think that at all. And so one of my favorite mentors told me one time, if you write down your grievances and go on these programs, you only have to say it one time. So that's what I did. Last year, I also wrote a piece for The Atlantic where I said, there's a problem with these police shooting videos now. Now that we know enough, the witnesses of Minnesota have shown us enough, from Mrs. Reynolds to Ms. Frazier to all the way to Gordon Parks. They have shown us enough. We now have all the proof that we need. What we need now is policy, and that's what we don't have. And so I said that this problem with police videos creates a vicious cycle that only Black people, again, have to do, where we have to pre-litigate our death, prove that we didn't deserve it. Then we have to, if it goes to trial, live with it in a court of public opinion and in a real court. So if we actually go into court to support our slain family member, we got to watch it on loop. And then after that, our family members are just left online. They are entombed online in ways that no one else, again, has to deal with. And I said, we really created quite a conundrum of saying that we need these videos to show you what's going on, to now ask for them on demand before we give our support. And I said, that's where it gets complicated. And so I began advising journalists and letting journalists around the nation know there's a better way to do this. And some of the things that I suggested were stopping right before the moment of impact if they feel they absolutely must show something. Some journalists contacted me and said, we're just not even going to do it anymore. I was on air in CBS in Washington where they had me on for a segment to explain why the station was making a decision to no longer air these videos, but to describe what happened in them and to leave these videos for the juries and for the families. And if the families decide to do what Mamie Till Mobley did, decide to make sure that the world sees what they did to their baby, by that time, we won't be so numb by seeing hundreds of them that it will matter. And so one of the pieces that most intrigued me was Wall Street Journal, where they did a piece where they were asking me, can we talk to some of the eyewitnesses that you talked to? Can we do a piece where we talk about how the technology has made bearing witness easier? And in it, I want you to kind of take a look at the approach that they chose with censoring how much of Mr. Floyd's video that they used.
My name is Fading Santana. In 2015, I filmed the killing of Walter Scott with my Samsung Galaxy S5.
I'm Arthur Reed, and in 2016, this was used to record the police killing of Alton Sterling in Baton Rouge, Louisiana.
Over the last decade or so, the smartphone has emerged as one of the strongest tools for capturing police brutality and racial injustice towards African Americans.
The smartphones, camera are the only thing that we have to protect ourselves.
But it is a weapon that tells the story. This is going to tell what happened to me. This is going to tell what took place.
Americans have just witnessed this power to document after Darnella Frazier, a 17-year-old in Minneapolis, captured the killing of George Floyd on her iPhone 11. She hit record and held steady for 10 minutes to capture Floyd's final words. I've chosen to limit the amount of graphic visuals from that video, and the others featured in this piece. The next day, Frazier posted her video to Facebook, and then, well, the world reacted. The clarity of the video and the ease of sharing it wasn't possible a decade ago, and certainly not 3 decades ago, when footage of the beating of Rodney King was captured on a Sony Handycam. By watching cell phone footage of police brutality from the last 11 years, you can see at least a 5 times increase in the resolution of images.
So I'll stop here as she begins to get more technical about the discussion. I'm happy that at least I was able to convince this journalist to make sure that if she must show something, and I didn't agree that she even needed to, that if she must, that she limit it. And I wasn't sure because I didn't get an answer back right away about what it was going to look like and whether that decision would be made. And then when I saw the timeline that I contributed in terms of making sure that the media acknowledged that Black folks had been trying to use their cell phone in this way for nearly a decade, I ended up feeling quite conflicted, to be honest, about my field and about journalism and about what role it played in keeping up a lot of these narratives. And so that's really where I want the conversation to start with you. Black people need witnesses in this hostile world, yes. But we've seen in the case of Breonna Taylor, sometimes we don't need video to get behind something, to say this just doesn't feel right. It feels wrong. It feels like we need to help. And in many cases, I challenge people to think, why did you need the video in the first place? Was it because you really did believe that African Americans are inherently criminal and you're looking for some proof of an exception to the rule, a perfect victim that you can get behind? That's the real elephant in the room that I want us to challenge as we talk today about what bearing witness truly means to various audiences. To Black people, it has meant naming a person. It has meant making sure that you are in real time getting justice for them the best that you can. And it's also meant for families having some measure of closure when the official police record conflicts with what the video said. And so for me, I think about the littlest witness of all. And I dedicated my book to another one of your daughters in your city, Diana Reynolds. She was 4 years old and in the car with Philando Castile when he was shot by Officer Yanez. And my daughter was 4 at the same time. And I could not stop thinking about how they should be playing together. They should not have to, she shouldn't even have had to see that. This is something you can't unsee. And so for Diana, bearing witness while Black meant something totally more loaded than any of us can do from a cell phone. She was there. And so all of the work that I do now is in consideration of the kids who are left behind. And although Mr. Floyd's daughter said, "Daddy changed the world," I often think, at what cost? And that's what I want us to talk about today, is at what cost and what can we do to make sure that little ones don't have to see things like this anymore in their lifetime. Thank you.
Dr. Richardson, thank you so much for that introduction to your book and for positioning this great new civil rights movement and the journey and the struggle in the context both of digital media and mobile media. It's interesting, several times you mentioned having just started your graduate program in 2014, and I was a year into mine, and that's kind of, it's pretty pretty amazing to know that we were all experiencing some of the same emotions and same experiences. And, you know, I was at that time studying those Trayvon Martin memes that you were talking about. And I had to stop and turn back to these cases that were happening on site because I thought that I could make a difference. Anyway, thank you for putting those narratives together and for the work that you've done as a sort of necessary part of curating this witnessing. So I guess I will start just with a more general question about sort of this trauma that we have all experienced by watching these narratives over time. And I know that you've talked to activists that sort of, you know, brought to light some of the things that they're experienced, but I'm wondering if you could speak to how they held up in all of this and how they have held up since 2014. We're in 2021 now. We've seen some change, some regression. How are people doing now? And what do you see in the work that you're doing right now?
Yeah, it's really exciting, Dr. Kilgo, because a lot of the things that I didn't think were imaginable in terms of people going from being amateurs, so to speak, to now infiltrating the highest levels of journalism have happened. So for example, people may know that Brittany Packnett Cunningham is a correspondent for MSNBC now. She went from tweeting and being on the front lines to now this meteoric rise. You see the same thing with Clint Smith in terms of him working for The Atlantic, another storied publication. But there's also a lot of trauma involved in this. I think about people like Brittany Farrell, who shared her story with me, who said that she had to disband Millennial Activists United because there was just so much pressure, state-sponsored, to end it. In fact, she was indicted on several counts of vandalism because she said that when she was blocking the road on a year anniversary of Mike Brown's death, that it was a highway. And she was charged with that, charged with kicking someone's car when she said they drove through the crowd. They were trying to roll over or run over some of the activists. And she said that she was accused of kicking that car. And the charges never stuck. So there was no time served or anything like that. But just the process of going through the fear of maybe facing that kind of time and being afraid of, who is this person with a long range camera now following me around and photographing me. That's all documented in the book in terms of, she said, I feel like fear is like a constant thing and it's almost a numbing effect. I'm inured to the, fact that I'm just not protected at all. And as activists in Ferguson began to mysteriously pass away, many other activists bowed out. They said, I don't want to participate in this anymore because now there's people disappearing or people dying under suspicious circumstances. A couple really painful cases of men who were shot and burned in cars. No one ever figured out what happened, who were highly photographed and very visible in the very first wave of the Black Lives Matter movements. And so these activists I interviewed knew them. They were friends with them, went to school with them, were childhood buddies. And so to not have them around anymore and only see them kind of immortalized in these Pulitzer Prize winning photographs, it hurts them. They're just kind of feeling like, I have survivor's remorse. How did I make it, through all of this? One of my other activists that I interviewed, Marissa Johnson, who famously interrupted Senator Bernie Sanders on his campaign trail, said, this is such harmful work. And she was like, it has such a short shelf life because it's just so traumatizing. And she talked about how she had to have white allies surround her as she left the dais that day because people were physically trying to bite her. And she said some of her friends did get bitten. And she was just like, this is crazy. Like, this is supposed to be probably like the most liberal part of America. This is Seattle, for goodness sake. So a lot of the trauma that some of them have experienced followed them. For some, it fueled them to keep going. For some, it fueled them to bow out. One last person I'll mention is Chris Stewart, who's a family attorney for Mr. Floyd. And he said he fell into this completely just accidentally. And he said, even though I went to Thurgood Marshall's law school, went to Howard University, I came out as an accidental death, wrongful death attorney. And he was handling a lot of cases where people passed away on the job or some kind of accident happened and, it was almost like a fluke and they passed away. But when he was contacted by Walter Scott's family, they said, we heard that you do, wrongful death and we think that this fits the bill. And there's a video. We have a young man who's given us a video. He hasn't given it to the mainstream, but he's passed it to us. And he said, I just immediately after church drove from Georgia to South Carolina to see this video. And he said from there, his whole life shifted because he realized that's the work he wanted to do to help these families get justice. And so from there, he did Alton Sterling. From there, then becomes a close confidant to the Floyd family. And to see all of these people just knowing each other, all moving in these same circles, trying to keep each other well and healthy has been inspiring over the last couple of years to see how they support each other. But again, at what cost? It's really hard to keep this work up when you don't have a round robin of people to participate. And so I think that's why it's really also encouraging, last thing I'll say, to see them mentoring that next generation of people who are going to come after them. And it's happening a lot faster because the news cycles are faster, social media travels faster. So a lot of the people who were in this book are no longer on the front lines, or they've kind of graduated into more establishment positions while they groom the new frontline folks. So it's definitely, this book is a snapshot because everybody has moved on in so many amazing ways.
Yeah, and you talked a little bit about, or a lot about actually, this sort of exhaustiveness of seeing so many videos over time, right? And the tragedy that brings to people. And I agree. I hope that people are more conscious of how they should share and include these videos in our everyday conversation. And I'm wondering, we both have a question from the audience, and one that I'll just sort of add to this question is how if we don't show these videos, how do we continue to expand the consciousness of our communities, and how do we continue to educate about the inhumanities that are happening? And then, one of our attendees said, you pointed out that there's this feeling of numbness that can come from bearing witness while Black. How do you feel about white people who've only recently started to notice and see violence committed against Black people and are saying that they have become numb to this violence?
That's so painful. Yeah, I think a lot about, again, it needs to be the family's prerogative, whether they want to release it. it shouldn't be up to me or you or journalists to figure out if that gets out. And the family being in control of a video is a very common thing, actually, or families who bound together throughout history to make sure certain videos were scrubbed from the internet is common. So just to give a few examples, if we think about 9/11, and we think about how ghastly it was to see people forced out of those buildings and falling to their death, there were videos that at one point documented all of that. And I remember being old enough to be in the newsroom saying, we are not going to put this online, are we? And people were like, no, but some of it is already floating out there. And many attorneys went to work to scrub that footage from various sites. And you'd be hard pressed to find it anywhere. People were like, this is indecent. We know something horrible happened that day. We don't need this. And so as an industry, we chose Falling Man, that one lone picture of a man falling almost perpendicular to the building to kind of epitomize that terror of making such a tough decision. If we think of any number of mass shootings that have affected largely white people, again, we haven't needed the footage. We haven't gone around and said, I need to make sure that I know what happened at the Las Vegas Music Festival, which is one of the largest mass shootings, and it happened on my coast. And I remember that morning just being horrified that my students were like, did you see what happened? And there's videos of people running, never to rise again. And just a few days later, those videos were gone. I was glad that they were scrubbed from the internet because I was like, I don't need to see that to know that hundreds of people lost their life that day. And the justification that we give in either of those cases is, well, we don't want copycats. So we got to make sure we don't glorify the actual act because we'll get copycats. Why are we thinking that same way with these police videos? Are we inspiring copycat police who are like, oh, that's how you do it? That's the defense I need to make sure I get out of this. Okay, good to know. So those kind of instances, playing with those kinds of ideas really troubled my thinking on whether we even need these videos to get the justice that we're seeking. And again, what troubled it even further is when I saw this rise in AAPI hate. And I started to see, for example, the killings that happened in Georgia. No one rushed and said, I need to see some footage first. I would like to see footage of what happened at the massage parlor. I mean, did somebody get out of pocket? Was it just a disgruntled client, customer? I just need to see the footage before I can make a judgment. No, that sounds horrible. It's crass, it's crude. I was sad about it because I was just like, how did this guy get from all these different buildings and then to have the police say he just had a bad day? My heart went out to their families. Fast forward to a few weeks later, you have the Sikh Americans who are shot down FedEx facility. You don't have people saying, well, I mean, what did they do? Is it something that maybe they did that seemed a little suspicious or off? Did they do something that made people feel like they were threatened or that their lives were threatened? I don't know. Nobody asked for security footage from that. We just grieved collectively with those families. Yet somehow, every single time, when it's a Black person, people are reserving their thoughts, reserving their compassion and sympathy and support because they're like, I need to see the video first. Show me this person didn't deserve this. Because if, first of all, if the police did it, they must be right. Second of all, Black people, I don't want to say it aloud, but inherently, they probably were doing something wrong, right? Were they resisting arrest? That argument fell apart, Dr. Kilgo, when we think about the insurrection that we saw on January 6th. Well, folks were highly resisting arrest, right? But they still went home. Most of them went home. In fact, police were the ones who lost their lives that day. And so when I think about these contradictions of show me the perfect victim before I can support you, again, that made me think these videos aren't doing the same thing that they did in the very beginning. And it makes me sad because now families have to live with these images floating out there and people who are still ambivalent or numb to them who are like, oh, I can't see another one of those. To you, it's another video. To somebody else, it's their relative. So we have to be judicious now about how we're viewing these and how we're talking about them in ways that don't victim blame and in ways that really seek to, especially as journalists, investigate what happened. And one of my favorite works of yours recently is an essay where you're challenging that. You're saying one of the key failures of journalism is this police said narrative. And you go on to point out how the initial reports from Breonna Taylor's police report said injuries none, or how George Floyd's initial report said he had a medical incident in the back of a police car. And real storied organizations that I will not name Really legendary organizations parroted these narratives and had egg on their face later when videos came out, videos from everyday people. So again, we should be beyond the point where we're questioning, do police always tell the truth? Well, sometimes no, we know that now. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Do they sometimes say things that they would never say about a Black assailant, like he just had a bad day? Yes, they say things like this. And as journalists, we should be questioning it. And as artists, we should be portraying that.
Yeah, thank you for that. I want to shift a little bit to think about the things that we don't see. Black women and trans women are often victims of state violence, state-sanctioned violence, and also victims of invisibility. In many ways, we don't know that these cases exist. What do you see are some of the challenges that people face with witnessing with Black women? And how does that play a role in this conversation?
Yeah, I think one of the other unintended consequences of always asking for the video is feeling like you can't get behind a cause unless you see that video. And in the case of women, and it's particularly trans women, a lot of these things happen under the cover of night. These things happen in dark, quiet places where there are no cameras, and they still need attention. If we think, for example, about a Tatiana Jefferson, I think about her a lot because we went to the same undergrad. We went to Xavier, and it's a very small HBCU in New Orleans. And when she was killed by police on a welfare check, a neighbor just called because they saw a door open in her house and asked the police to kind of go check it out. And the police, without asking questions, shot her through a window when they detected movement beyond the veil. And my classmates and I were just horrified. We were sending all kind of group thread messages like, who's supporting her family? Is she okay? This is horrible. Can we do a scholarship? Like, what happened? And then to hear months later that both her mom and dad died of broken hearts, as I call it, and heart attacks within months of each other of this happening, was just so tragic, because I thought, here we are with a name that's almost been forgotten. Rihanna mentioned her name at the NAACP Awards that year, but I don't hear a Tatiana Jefferson's name in the way that I hear Mr. Floyd's name. And again, it's this conundrum, this double-edged sword of people feeling like, well, I don't really remember it because I didn't see a video for it. And so what goes underreported, and why Kimberly Crenshaw thought it was so important to create this parallel Say Her Name movement, is because we have to recognize that a lot of things that happen to Black women and girls will not be televised. And it doesn't mean that we can't care about it. As we've seen with the Breonna Taylor case, we are quite capable of getting behind something that has no video. And I think that that's where the conversation needs to go next. I know that, to answer the second part of that question, there are a lot of white folks who are new to this idea and who are horrified, like, whoa, how did I miss this? How did I not know that this was going on? Where can I support? How can I support? What should I be reading? Like, there was a whole lot of that last year in terms of people just wondering, okay, my blinders are off, like, pour in some stuff now, help me understand this. And I think the work now doesn't come from watching more of those videos. It comes from challenging who we elect. It comes from making sure that we are watching all the policies that are springing up as a result of one of your daughter's work. Darnella Frazier did a brave thing by bearing witness. Best believe that the backlash is real. There's a lot of states who are now trying to ban cop watching, trying to ban filming police, banning voting, making all these restrictive voter registration laws and all these laws that would prevent you from being comfortable while you're waiting to vote, when you may well want to vote out a sheriff who's problematic. We have to think about everyone who's down ballot. And if you think about the big systemic changes that it's going to require, you then start to understand, oh, that's why there was an insurrection. Folks wanted to stop that count. They wanted to stop that power from being transferred in ways that they didn't approve of. Oh, that's why we're seeing this backlash in terms of more than 400 laws on the books now and counting, of changing voting laws so that they're more restrictive. That's why we're seeing all of these things that pop up that make stronger punishments for protesters, Florida being the first state to pretty much make it illegal to protest. And so there's all these copycat laws. As soon as other states notice, oh, that got passed, yep, I'm going to do that too. That's where the real work is. And that's what I say to my white allies who are like, what do I do next? It doesn't come from watching a video and being horrified. It comes from now looking at the backlash that the movement is receiving because of its success. And that's a reliable pattern that you can follow. When you look at every Black movement that's had some success, whether it's Reconstruction, the Civil Rights Movement, and now BLM, there's immediate white backlash to that, white supremacist backlash, be more specific. And white folks who are allies have to make sure that they're aware of what that backlash is so they can counter that. That's the real work.
I totally agree. I'm going to shift to talking about journalists a little bit. We know that journalists are also charged with bearing witness, right? And so much of the mainstream press really doesn't do justice to civil rights efforts, to coverage of Black communities generally. And that's evidenced both by research and empirical scholarship, and also by many of the voices in your book. They were talking about how they could do it better. We have a question from the audience that's talking about a Minneapolis photographer that describes herself as a journalist and activist that was working in Time magazine. And this participant says that he didn't last long at Time magazine because she felt her voice was compromised. And that's the attendee's paraphrase. Would you describe the difference between shooting and sharing through Black Twitter and other self-regulated channels versus shooting through traditional media?
That's a great question. Traditional media still has gatekeepers, but I think a lot of early research into social media assumed that it didn't. And so while we may be thinking of them as two diametrically opposed kind of outlets, saying that over here is where the established people hang out and they have these gatekeepers who will or won't let me publish, we somehow think that social media is different from that and say, this is the Wild West, I can put whatever I want on here. But we also found out last summer, the research showed that that's not true. Social media has gatekeepers too. They can decide to, for example, shadow ban people and not show what it is that they've posted to everyone on their feed. And in fact, Instagram and TikTok apologized publicly for doing that. They were like, yeah, we did. We shadow banned Black activists this summer. We shouldn't have done that. Facebook has also come under fire. There's a USA Today article that talks about people who merely mentioned racism or talked about Black Lives Matter during last summer were suspended. Like their account was suspended on Facebook. They would log in and be like, whoa, what did I say? What happened? There's, all kinds of ways that social media have become this outsized power that somehow even eclipse what legacy media was able to amass in terms of power, because they exist in this quasi area where they're not quite platforms and they're not quite news outlets themselves. And there's, again, laws. This is where allies come in. Section 230, these kinds of things that people can be arguing against that give them more accountability for what's on their page. We are allowing these social media outlets to be our official archive of the moment. What happens when they don't want it on there? They can delete it. And then what happens to your entire catalog? It's gone. It never existed. And I talk about a point in the book where this became so poignant to me as I'm looking at, again, Diamond Reynolds' footage of Philando, Castile, and trying to make my way through it, because it took me several starts to even be able to watch it. I could not watch it for several times. When I finally watched it to be able to describe it, to write it in a book, I realized she's doing this a month before Corinne Gaines tried to do the same thing. Corinne Gaines is a woman in Baltimore, Maryland, who had a standoff with Baltimore police who were trying to serve her with a traffic warrant, of all things, a traffic warrant. And she refused to come outside of her house, which was her right. And the police barge in. Well, they don't barge in immediately. They kick in the door and they are menacingly in the hallway with guns. And she has a 5-year-old in there with her. And at some point we see her tell the 5-year-old, go ahead, go out. You can go out. You don't have to be in here with mommy. Because at this point she's decided to arm herself. And she's like, I don't know if I'm going to make it out of here. I decided not to come outside. And there you are trying to come in. I'm sending my son out so he can be safe. And then the feed is cut. Because I remember watching this live and wondering, where did she go? What happened? And I'm thinking, this is the same platform that a month ago was patting itself on the back in an open letter saying, we are happy that we could be, a beacon of, sharing this kind of news, as tragic as it may be to watch. We're glad that our new feature, Facebook Live, allowed us to see the tragedy in Minneapolis. Well, there's a tragedy in Baltimore that's about to happen, and you are cohorting or, working with the police who have asked for this feed to be cut, and you're cutting it. And that later came up in all kind of court documents that the police contacted Facebook and was like, please turn off the live. And Facebook complied and they shot her dead in her own home. Bullets grazed her son And you can see in a YouTube video of little Cody Gaines in the hospital bed with bandages up to his cheek, recounting, bearing witness while Black, this is what they did to my mom. And I think about him, and I think about Dayana, I think about all these little babies who had to be there when their loved ones were taken away from them. And just to me, it just seems like social media gets away from some of that blame. We blame legacy media a lot, but I will never forgive the people who made that decision to not allow us to know what was going on in that moment. Because if she, again, is making the decision, if she has the agency and she's saying, I want the world to see this thing, then that should have been allowed. And so we, again, are in this real weird place where we have more footage than ever. Everybody's got a phone, but we have very few channels to get it out. And then some of these channels are designed to disappear after 24 hours. So I think about people like John Lewis, who died last year. We have all this elegant footage of him walking across Edmund Pettus Bridge. And I think there's so much archival footage of his work. But when I go to look for archival footage of the work of people who are featured in my book, it doesn't exist in some cases. It's been scrubbed from the internet. People have deleted it. Other people have been scared because the police have started to follow them around and call them by their Twitter handle. They deleted it themselves. And so we're at this place where how do we get to a point where we have more footage than any other point in humankind's history, but no place to save it but with these guys, and we're beholden to them in ways that we were never perhaps beholden to legacy media. So it's a real conundrum that has to be worked out.
Yeah, we don't have them sort of in the shadows as they would have retired. Some of the lynching photos are just deleted. And it's incredibly problematic. Where do we go from here? How do we, because we do have archives of some video, right? Like there are some videos that we have archives of, and those are different kinds of witnesses. Can you talk about those, about other people who have cell phones? It's not just Black witnesses in these instances. We have other people who have cell phones. What's their role in this? And also police body cam footage. Like what is that? How does that play into this broader witnessing conundrum?
Yeah, I really like this term by Patricia Hill Collins. She's a sociologist and she calls it social blackening. And one of the things that she writes about in her book is that some people, by virtue of being associated with or living close by African Americans, become symbolically Black, just as some people, due to their propinquity to whiteness, become symbolically white. And so she's using this concept to explain how somebody who is from Cambodia, for example, or maybe someone who's from Sri Lanka who immigrated here and lives in a very poor part of Black America, very blue collar part, may be considered Black by association. And so they would have the same sensibilities that a Black person would have when emergency strikes, because they know that they are equally vulnerable. And that's why you see, for example, a man who is not Black, George Holliday, picking up his camera to film Rodney King. He's Argentinian, but he realizes, whoa, something's not right here. And we see Ramsey Orta, who is one of the friends of Eric Garner, who is a Latino man, who decided also, I'm going to record these last few moments of I Can't Breathe. He's not a Black man, but he's socially blackened in that moment because he knows he does not have the privilege to check that officer. He doesn't have the privilege to intervene or use his body in ways that maybe a white person would. And so when I think about cases like that, even Alton Sterling's case, again, another case outside of a bodega where you have a Yemeni man this time taking his surveillance camera and his cell phone to film to make sure he got every single bit of it, in addition to the Black witnesses who were there. This concept of social blackening then becomes very useful to us. And so sometimes people can be socially whitened. Sometimes you may see, for example, people who grew up around a lot of white folks or were adopted by white folks be able to tap into that privilege sometimes, and sometimes not. And so I love that idea and that concept of explaining or playing with people who realize right in that moment, I don't have any privilege here. I may have agency, but I don't have a lot of privilege. And so the way I defend myself becomes by pressing record. And so that's how I dealt with that in the book, because a lot of the folks that I did talk to who were additional witnesses or who were not Black said, I just thought that it could happen to me too. And if it did happen to me, I would want somebody to document that. And then the other fallout of this thing that scholars are calling two-valence, T-O-U-T, everybody looking, is this concept of surveillance, which happens from on high. That's like your blue light cameras, your dash cams, authoritative figures looking, matched with surveillance, which is happening from below, which is the less powerful people using their cell phone to glare back up like, yeah, I see you. Everybody is watching everybody. And a lot of scholars are now calling that surveillance. And that is very, very difficult to deal with, because when you have a police body cam, studies show that this kind of first person bias actually helps the cop. And so when you see a police body cam video, you're actually identifying with and taking on the qualities of that person. It's almost like a first person shooter video game where you're imagining that you have a controller in your hands, but your arms are the police officer's arms. Whoever's arms are extended, you become an extension of. And so there's a lot of legal scholarship now that's going out that says these police body cams are problematic because they bias the witness, they're jittery, they're jumpy, they add to the confusion, they make people feel like, oh, well, that does seem like a pretty chaotic scene. I probably would have messed up too. And it really doesn't help to have that viewpoint. I don't really agree or disagree with that. I think we need, in the court of law, as many angles as possible. But that's just one, strain of thought that's going on out there. Another thing that's really problematic, though, to me, is when police don't release to the families, or when they say, oh, my camera wasn't turned on. So in the case of Corinne Gaines that I just mentioned, police had body cams on them, but they were like, oh, I forgot to turn it on. You forgot to turn it on moments before you rush into someone's home and kill them in front of their 5-year-old. It just seems suspicious. Like, if you're going to do that, it seems that you would want to protect yourself and have on record that you were justified in doing that. So again, you see this uneven game that law enforcement plays sometimes, to say, well, I'm going to play with how long it takes for me to release it, or I'm only going to show you, in the case of this North Carolina case that's just erupted, I'm only going to show you 20 seconds of it, or I'm going to drop out the audio, or I'm going to, otherwise alter it in a way that's not helpful. And so in the last chapter of the book, I talk about how, even victims of families, even Mike Brown's mom called on her state to employ and to start doing body cams on everybody, but that has backfired. And one of the last hacks, I'll say, that I noticed recently last year is that a lot of cops are starting to play popular songs while people are filming. And if they play that popular song, they know that someone can't then post it on social media with the audio, because social media will flag it and say, this song is copywritten. And because this song is copywritten, you can't upload. And so then you're stuck with putting a video up there that doesn't have any sound, and cops know that. So that's a hack that is circulating. And so we keep seeing this struggle between the right to look, and Black people have never been able to look before. It's always been forbidden. And even if you think about kids, when they're in trouble, they look down at the floor and the parent has to say, look at me when I'm talking to you, right? It's like a punishment to you like show deference by looking downward. And that's what we've done for too long, is look downward or look askance as we took notes on the slide. But now this right here, this bold action just has scared the powers that be, because it's something that's unprecedented and powerful.
Yeah, and I'd like to speak a little bit about the policies and laws going around the restrictions of this. We have Dr. Kirtley in the audience today, who just is making a comment that said that, the laws that would be banning photographing police would almost certainly be unconstitutional, or be deemed unconstitutional. And yes, we would hope so, right? But we see these pop up a lot now. We're seeing like the policing of policing police, right? And we're seeing these policies and bills pop up about regulating what a protest is and calling it a riot through anti-riot bills. What are the challenges that you see citizens who are willing to engage in witnessing, that are, called to engage in witnessing, that survive by engaging in witnessing? What do you think the challenges of the future are? What are the challenges of the future?
Yeah, I think one of the most disturbing stories that I saw this summer came from, I believe it was Washington Post, and they did a beautifully humanizing yet horrifying story about the 8 people who lost their vision during the riots. And they called them riots. They said these actually started out quite peacefully in various parts of America and descended into riots when police came, because police came with rubber bullets and they came with flashbangs, and they were heavily militarized and ready to use all the gear that they'd spent all this money on. And they showed the people who lost their vision. And I thought, how poignant is this to aim at someone's eye so they cannot bear witness? And I thought, this wasn't an accident. You know, it's symbolic that people are aiming for the very organ that you would use to say, I saw something wrong happen. And they're doing this in peaceful settings. And so I think that that piece right there showed me that there was a real danger on the horizon in terms of people who decided to not only peacefully protest, but publish the things that they'd seen. So I think some of the future challenges will be this, again, this resistance. We have to watch these patterns of progress and backlash, progress and backlash. And I think as we look and see it, how white supremacy mutates from slavery to lynching to police brutality, people are often asking me, well, what's next? What will it look like next? If we abolish police brutality, what will it be replaced with? That's the real work, to figure out what is up someone's sleeve? What are up white supremacists' sleeves? And right now, it's looking like your right to protest is on the table. Your right to vote is on the table. Because I sincerely believe, and maybe I'm too much of a kumbaya person, but I really believe last summer when I saw people from all walks of life out there braving a pandemic to protest, it really made me emotional, brought me to tears, because I thought, oh, Black folks aren't alone. Like, a lot of people don't want this kind of country. A lot of people don't want a country that's divided against itself, where all these injustices live, where they're scared that their people will be the targets this month. You know, a lot of people don't want to live like that. And I believe sincerely that there are more people who believe in equality and who believe in that mission and that promise of America than there are people who are bigoted against that. It's that a lot of times we don't know where to start. And so I would encourage a lot of people to start where they're planted, whatever area or industry you're in, look for systemic injustice within it and root it out. Like you and I, we pick on our colleagues, we pick on journalists and say, yeah, we loftily say that we're the first draft of American history. Well, get that draft right, because that first draft is hard to forget. And when you mess it up, that becomes truth in a lot of people's minds. So don't mess up. For someone else who's an artist, they may be taking a different approach. For someone who's an engineer or a judge, you know, there's injustice everywhere. And that's really the fabric upon which our country is built. And we finally have reached a point where we're ready to reckon with that. We're ready to recognize that this racism, it exists everywhere. There's a lot of work to be done. And so it will take more than one group of people, take more than scholars like you and me. It'll take everyday folks calling it out all of the time. So I think the future of this is staying vigilant to the many forms that white supremacy takes, because it is like a virus. And I hate to keep, you know, using these kind of biology kind of analogies, but I'm trained as a biologist first. And I know that when I worked in the lab at FDA, one of the things that I was fighting against, one of my core projects was antimicrobial resistance. And I was always looking at microbes and just fascinated at how they change. And you can see them under the microscope, how one day they have like one little leg, and then the next, you know, minute they look like a coronavirus with like this big old, you know, veil of suction tubes coming out of its head. And I'm like, how did you go from that to that? We never should have let you live. You know, and the thing is, we were trying to design drugs, antimicrobial, you know, things that would attack them so that they wouldn't have a chance to multiply. And we realized if you let just one of them live, then they had a chance of becoming stronger and mutating and multiplying. And so the mission I think of often is that we had to create things that would stamp out MRSA, which was like this resistant Staphylococcus aureus, or things that would stamp out, you know, all kinds of bugs that live in the hospital. And doing that required us to kind of anticipate how it would mutate. So I'm going somewhere with this. When I looked at, you know, all of the different organisms, and I would try to guess, I think it's going to sprout a leg there, or I think it's going to get a new antenna there. There are scientists who are right now doing that with COVID, trying to figure out these variants. We need everybody to have all hands on deck with racism too. We need scientists and everybody to think about what might be next. This just isn't a project for me and for you. This is really an exploration of, if we're going to figure out if it's going to sprout a leg or an arm, whose sector is that going to be in? And who is closest to it, who can root it out fastest? And I think that that is really the work, is coming together as a team. And so much of science is done in a team. And I think this American project that we all believe in is going to require us to work as a team. And so much work hasn't been done like that traditionally. We've thought of ourselves in silos and organizations and professions, but we're really going to have to come together, because we can't just throw out words like systemic racism without realizing the root is system, and systems are perfected to work a certain way. And once they get rolling, it's very hard to stop them unless you are deliberate about it. And so that's what I think is next, is for us to become those antimicrobial, kind of doctors that stop this virus once and for all.
I love that. Just bringing all this sort of back to the Twin Cities and Minneapolis, those scenes that you were talking about that also brought me to tears this summer, that I got to experience live in person, really for the first time, for an extended amount of time, to be on the ground here. You did see this community come together. You did see how all of these different places could come and really try to consistently make a difference. And I think your work is really inspirational for this to continue, especially here, as we've seen Dante Wright's case, several of the other police officers that were involved in George Floyd's murder coming up in our dockets, our court dockets. We will need that solidarity, and we'll need that that cohesion again. So thank you again for your work, and for the work you've done curating this witnessing yourself. And thank you so much for this presentation today.
Thank you. And thank you for your work and for being on the front lines, both behind the computer and on the street. It's so important to do both. And I'm just grateful that you're in that space.
Thank you so much, Dr. Richardson, Dr. Kilgo, and to our ASL interpreters, Latoya Jordan and Valerie McMillan. And thank you all in the audience for joining us and for holding space with us tonight. We invite you to continue this conversation with the Weisman Art Museum and through our summer exhibition just yesterday, a poster art exhibition that uses iconic pop culture references to engage and raise awareness and have conversations about systemic racism in our not so distant past and our present. You will all be sent a survey after this event, and we would really appreciate it if you'd fill it out, as it helps us design programs and initiatives that better meet your interests and your needs. And if you complete the survey, you'll be entered to win a $20 gift certificate to our museum shop. And if you'd like to support WAM's digital programs like this, you'll notice there's a giving link that will be in the email sent to you as well. And your donations will help keep programming like this strong and freely accessible. So until the next time we see each other, thank you, stay hopeful, and stay creative. Good night.